from Sonoma Raceway, back where it all began, and delighted to be here again this weekend. I love Sonoma. It's right there in the wine country. You can be here in November, as we are, and the sun is still shining, and it's a beautiful day here. The crowds came yesterday, and I'm sure they'll come again today. We've got a feast of great motorsport, as you heard there at the top, to offer you. And like I said, if you stick with us for the day, you'll really get a sense of the history of motorsport, not just in this country, but also how it affected the USA. Because with our first group that we start off with, which is Group 3, you will see that transition, if you will, from effectively European motorsport and European cars making their influence made on America, and then America pushing back and saying, yeah, well, we can do that too. And Group 3 is a little bit that way. I'm joined in the booth, and I'm delighted to welcome both Max Jameson and Steve Smith. They will be out in cars later today, but I'm sure they're very familiar with all the cars here. Let me start with Steve. Great to have Sonoma like we have. But as I said in the opener just a moment ago, this whole event and each of the groups represented really do give somebody who's never been to an event like this or tuned in to an event like this a sense of how America fits into the world of motor racing.
Very true. We've been a part of it, Max and I, for quite some time. Actually, between Max and Martin Swig, they kind of got me going in vintage racing, but I was doing it with Porsche Owners Club, and in the early days, late 60s, early 70s. So it's wonderful to see all these cars out here, and this group is very, very special. We have a car that's out there this morning, which is driven by Bill Lyon, and his son Alexander's here too, which is going to be carrying the torch beyond his dad. Like Max helped me get involved with this in the beginning. And so we've got the whole thing going here, and Bill's driving the RS60 Spider, and you don't see many of those because they're the 4-cam vehicle that Porsche brought to the forefront right before the English kind of really took off with all their cars and everything. And like you said, it's one of those deals where everything evolves, and it kind of evolves because of kind of the hot rod, bigger is better, cubic inches, and these were the cars that didn't have the big cubic inches, but they had the light frames and the good drivers and the narrow tires, and it's really special. I mean, and what's really special is that the pontoon Ferrari that's out there was the car that ran with the number 14 Spider at Sebring in 1960, which was a pseudo factory entry. They came to Sebring with two cars. Bob Holbert Sr. drove the car with Schechter, and upon arriving in Sebring in 60 in an airplane from Porsche AG, they were told that they couldn't enter the race because they had Castrol Oil sponsoring on the car, and the reality was it was an ESCO race sanctioned by that major producer. So there became the game, how do we get the car back in the race? And so they took the car out, and they went to Brumos and said, hey, don't you guys want to enter a car in the Sebring race? So eventually, at the end of the race, David Love was driving a 57 pontoon Ferrari, which I think is the car that's on the track right now. And towards the end of the race, the 1500cc Spider got index of performance and second overall, and the other Porsche entry got first overall. And David in the Ferrari was closing, and if it had been another lap and a half, I think it would have been a little bit different outcome. But anyway, great story, great cars out here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of history, and that's what brings us to this, and the love, and passing it on to the next generation here with Alexander, with Bill's son.
Yeah, and as you can see, we're also going to be bringing you live pictures from the paddock itself, which is a really organic paddock. It's moving, its involvement with the audience and the crowd here is great. You can get up close. You don't have to be a racing driver. You don't have to be out there to enjoy this. You can get up right close. And once these guys are parked, they also have a pre-grid, effectively you know, Velocity grid, pre-grid, Velocity Avenue, and so you can get up close to the cars. And I saw a few little youngsters doing exactly what I did with my dad and mum back in the days, back at Brands Hatch in the 1970s, getting inside the car and pretending to drive it. And unfortunately, it stuck, and here I am, all these years later. Max, give me a little bit about your history of racing in historics and why you enjoy doing it.
Well, historics is, in this particular case, vintage racing. What vintage racing has become for the spectator is a chance to, for your father and your grandfather and maybe even great-grandfather to come out and see cars that they remember that were racing when they would talk about things like Indianapolis or local tracks, because all of the cars that are out here, it gives them the idea that they can still use the car and they don't have to leave it in the barn for the last 50 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's really kind of neat from that standpoint, because every car has an identification, and when you walk around and look at them, your father will sit there and say, I can remember that car when. And so it's great from that standpoint.
Yeah, no question about it. And just to give you an idea of what we're looking at Group 3, this is our first qualifying race, and so they'll race again tomorrow. So if you join us tomorrow, you'll also see this group in action. But we have William Taylor leading the way at the moment in a 1962 Cooper Monaco. We've also got Nick Price and a Sadler Mayer Special. And you'll hear the words special and, you know, for example, the Cooper Porsche Pooper. Now, maybe I'll get you to explain, but basically that is exactly what we're talking about. It's this sort of hybrid combination. We've got Huffaker Genies that were made, you know, just down the road from here. And then, of course, we've got the classic Lotus 17s, the Lotus 11s, the Lotus 11 Le Mans, and then Porsche Devin Speedster. And when you hear the word Devin, it doesn't mean that it's not a Porsche. It's just, it's sort of a take, if you will, on the original Porsche from Germany. And then, you know, the Americans adding, whether it be, go ahead.
And you've got to speak toward home-built cars
Correct.
as well that are 50 or 70 or years old as well.
Absolutely. We're looking at the 41 of Kurt Balbain in a Lola Mark 1. So these are original cars that came over, Lotus and Lola, and raced against either American cars or fellow Jaguars from the UK. The Jaguar, particularly the XK120, became hugely popular here in California when the likes of Sterling Moss and Phil Hill drove it at the Pebble Beach races in the early 50s. And that really was a catalyst for here at Sears Point and many others, is that, you know, you got world-class drivers driving these production-based cars, and I think that's another reason why it took off, is that these were names you'd heard of from Europe and who were racing in Formula 1 and Formula 2.
Mm-hmm. Well, then you got the wild one, the Monsterati.
Yeah, I love this, yeah.
And David Swig is out there driving it. You know, he's the second generation behind his dad, Martin, who I mentioned earlier, who got me going in this. When I was working for Max for Toyota in the field, I would call on their dealership, Toyota, downtown San Francisco, and Martin and I spent 15 minutes talking about corporate stuff, and the next thing we know, we're looking at alphas, we're doing all this and that and everything. And you know, he went on to do the California Mealy and those types of things too. So anyway, you know, the Monsterati is exactly what Max was talking about. I mean, I'm sure it was conceived on the floor, somebody's garage with a piece of chalk, and you know, kind of carved it out, and you know, David's driving it very well, and it's carrying on the car, and you know, that's what the original owner wanted to see happen with the car, and here we are. We're still going strong.
There's the 57 Cooper Monaco there. That is driven by William Taylor. And yeah, the Monsterati, I actually had a chat with the guys preparing it, and 53 to 56, Bill Janowski of Dallas, Texas, you know, basically hot rodded this, upgraded the engine to a Chevy V8 in 57, and then raced all over the South in SCCA events, including road races, hill climbs, etc. And, you know, its competition, as I mentioned, would be Jaguar D-types or XKs, Maserati 300s, and Ferraris, and kind of held its own. But as you say, it's a classic example of you know, something that is put together and can be competitive as we look at that Maserati in action with David Swig at the wheel. And there you see, we do keep an eye on the times and the ideas. It is a race, but it's, well, and as you can see, Mr. Swig in the 35 Maserati in 6th place over them all, but it is that Cooper Monaco. Are there cars here when you come here? There must be, guys, that you think, ooh, I want to take a look at that, rather than necessarily want to own it or drive it. You just want to take a look at it because it's not something you've seen?
Yeah, you know, I'm more of a Porsche kind of guy.
Yep.
Yeah, over years since '66, and you know, I'm always curious, being how I'm kind of pseudo retired and doing my hobby now full time with the guys. We've got a 3-car team, you know, 3-driver team that we come up with, you know, with our honest engine, you know, deal, and it's, you know, I'm always inquisitive to see who's got what.
Yeah.
And where they are, you know, and how do they get there, because you know, I got to keep the guys happy with their cars, and you know, we really focus on safety first, and then reliability and fun third. So it's, you know, it's something you got to do, and you learn a lot from the people that are here that you've been doing this with, you know, for years and years and years. So it's like a homecoming, and this event is just so over the top for anything that we do throughout the year. I'll probably get my butt kicked for that, but you know. But anyway, I look forward to this event more than anything, and it's such a beautiful part of the world.
Well, and that's why we wanted you to come in and have a chat, because we want to hear from you why you do it. And I think from my point of view, it's all very well talking about the cars and numbers, but I want to get to know why and what gets you excited. Go ahead, man.
So basically, I started out as a hot rodder when I read my first hot rod magazine, and so that's what got me started for the next 60 years, doing all the things that we can do. From there, I went to drag racing, to building boats and racing boats, and from there to working corporate-wise, and kind of got out of it for a while. Then I also became a dealer later, car dealer later, and so at this point in time, it's just been something that you start collecting things, and then you start looking around the garage, and all of a sudden you figure, I'm looking at 20 cars wondering what I'm going to do with them all.
Can't do it all. Now, talking of, you're out in Group 2 and 6, and Steve, you're out in Group 2. What are you driving this weekend, and tell us a little bit why you chose these cars?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm in a 58 Speedster.
Nice.
And, you know, it was a run in period time in Southern California. It went to the runoffs. It was a Western Divisional champion, driven by Dale Hirsch. And Dale was one of the big kids when I got started doing the POC time trials at Riverside Raceway.
Yep.
So, you know, I was always looking at that because my first car was a 57 Porsche Coupe, so I was drawn to it. And I was also a dealer's son, so I grew up in the business, so to speak. And so running your Speedster at Riverside Raceway, living in Hemet, I could drive from Hemet to Riverside Raceway in 19 minutes. And so guys like Gurney would show up. Wow. And next thing I know, I got this guy standing next to me that, you know, that my dad would take me with the Ford group to turn 6 at Riverside or 7, and we'd sit there and watch the races at Riverside 500, and Jan Durney would show up, as I called him, you know, on my dad's shoulders. And you know, that was a big deal. I mean, Dan was the guy that did a lot at Riverside, and obviously other things down the road. So he was kind of like my guy. And so, you know, then it just went from there, and got my competition driver's license through Alan Johnson, who's an instructor, and then went on and just continued to do my hobby, which were Porsches in my parents' garage, and working on this and that while I was doing other things corporately with Max and, you know, Toyota and all that.
Was it easy to get the parts that you needed from Germany?
In those days, you could buy a hood handle for a 356 for $19. And I would drive into Vasek Polak and, you know, at the beach and, you know, get out the parts book and go take this, take this, take this. And we went on vacation or something like that. We'd find the Porsche dealership. My dad and I'd go in there and we'd buy all the parts. And so he would fix up T-Birds and Rancheros and stuff like that, but then it went to Porsche 356s, and then it just kind of evolved from there. And the parts now, I mean, I always say the person that has the most parts is going to win.
Yeah.
You know, and because they're becoming harder and harder to get. And those of us that are at our stage of life, you know, we're starting to shed some of our stuff. Like Max said, what are we going to do with all this stuff and the projects? And so, you know, it's still out there, but you got to dig.
Yeah.
And the original stuff restored is probably better than the reproduction stuff.
That's interesting to know. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
looking at the 41, the Lola Mark 1. And Max, what are you driving? And
I have a 57 Porsche Speedster, and it's my third one. But basically, I've been Porsche along with Steve for quite a while. One of the unique things about vintage racing, by the way, is that where else does a spectator be able to come and look at such expensive and fantastic cars, and they can sit there and come right into the pits and talk to the driver about the car, and the driver loves to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because he spent so much time on it, and whatever it has become to him, he's willing to probably talk longer than you want to hear.
I know, and it's a hackney old phrase. You know, we don't put our art on the walls. We race it, and you know, but there's a serious note to that. And you've brought a youngster here. His dad's out there. I think when the days of the combustion engine and the days of what has gone in the past are slowly fading away. Youngsters now often don't even drive cars, and yet I think the same thing that ignited our passion for cars. Especially when you see them in an environment like this, where you see the evolution, if you will, of these cars, and also just we all drive cars today, and yet you can see how they came to be, how radiators cooled, how headlights worked, how disc brakes, and drum brakes went from drum to disc, and so on and so forth. So everything that is packed into these older cars is now derivated into the new cars, and I think that is not lost when you come to an event like this.
One of the things that we see this weekend is the amount of teenagers walking around as spectators looking at the cars. That, to me, is the most encouraging thing about this whole sport.
Yeah, I noticed it yesterday, and that, I think, is really, really special.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it last night when we were driving out of the paddock. And, it's usually they gravitate towards the newer manufacturer cars and everything, but they are watching the other cars that are out there. I think I also drive a 935 K3 Porsche that the Whittington brothers had, and they know the stories about the cars. They've read, they're on social media, and they really appreciate it. They really like it.